Welcome, dear friends, once again to the third section of this essay, Uneasy Homecoming. Now, in the second section, we discussed that Connie had already come across a bag from under the bed. Let us find out what that bag contained. A very long time later, Connie dragged it out. It was a bag with bulges in it. Why there were bulges? Because it was stuffed with many things. The bag contained a large number of things. Her hands shook horribly, but she emptied the contents on the floor. She took out the things that were lying inside, that were stuffed inside. There were cameras, Sally Hamilton's necklace and rings. There were watches and fountain pens. This must be what the burglars had taken from the Hamilton's house and the Blair's house and the Smithsons and the Tonys. Now, if you remember correctly, in part 2, we had discussed that she had been informed by a friend of hers that there had been constant robberies, frequent robberies in the locality over the last few days. Mrs. Winston, she was not a friend, of course, but an acquaintance who had informed her that there had been constant robberies in the locality, frequent robberies in the locality during the last 15 days. So Connie knew that whatever the bags contained, the contents of the bag must have been stolen, must have been taken from these houses which she had mentioned. The cameras and pens and watches came from Sadler's shop, where Mr. Field had come upon the burglars and they had beaten him almost to death, and he was lying unconscious in the hospital, and there was no possibility of his coming back to senses. I mean, he was going to die. Connie went to the bedroom door. Her knees were water. What do you mean by that? Knees? Knee mane antu. Antu lagana pani hegala. No. Knees were not able to hold her. She felt very weak. She was very nervous. And when she came to know that the robbers had packed the bag and they had left it in her bedroom, she knew they would come back. So naturally, her fear had intensified. She was now having more fear. Her house had been used as the hiding place for the loot of the burglaries that had taken place in her absence. So the burglars or the robbers had stolen things from different places, and during her absence, they had used her house as a storehouse, as a secret place where they could dump things from different places. Now, if they found out that she was back, obviously they would see it as a problem, as a trouble. So when Connie was present in the house, how would they come to take it back, take the bag back? That would be a problem. And simply because there was another thing, simply because Mr. Field recognized the robbers, he must have found out who exactly was the robber and what was his name. Simply because he found him out, recognized him, he was beaten to almost death. Now, there was a possibility that if the robbers found trouble on their way, on their path, they could also do some harm to Connie. This possibility was very much there. Unless they came and stopped her, quickly, shivering, Connie turned out the light in her bedroom so that they would not find that Connie had come back. In the upstairs hall, Downstairs, she turned out the light in the living room, went quickly to the front door. It was lying open. She locked it from inside. She went to the other rooms also. But there was a thought that suddenly, a sudden thought struck her, came to her mind. She thought, okay, suppose the robber is hiding somewhere in the bay, somewhere there. ସେଠି ପାଖରେ ଗୋଟେ ଜମି ଥିବ, ସେଠି ଗୋଟେ open space ଥିଲା, it was an open space. They were hiding behind some bush, they were hiding behind some tree, and they must have marked from a distance, hey, Koni has come back. Okay, suppose they do not know Koni is living there. Still, they would think, okay, the owner of the house has come back. Now there is a problem. Oh, she is switching on the lights. Oh, she is switching it off. So there would be problems for sure. She went to the dining room, switched off the lights, and she made sure that the windows were locked. She went into the pantry. Pantry is where she had stored her food. It was dark, and she moaned. Moaning is creating a noise. Crying out in pain is moan. She almost moaned because she was terribly afraid of darkness. Somebody might be hiding there in the pantry. It was dark. Moaning with fear, she was afraid to enter it. She flashed on the light to make sure of the window. And when she wanted to fasten the window, fasten is to tighten, to lock it from inside, she saw that the window was broken. So the robber had come inside through the window of the pantry. The next, a neat section of the glass was missing. It had been cracked and removed so that someone could reach in and unlock it. It was now impossible to lock it. Anyone could reach it and open it again. So now she was sure someone had broken this window from outside, put his hands in, then opened it and come in. Connie turned off the light quickly, fled into the kitchen, made that dark. She also went to the kitchen and switched off the light there. But as the bulb dimmed, she realized what she had seen in the very act of pressing the light switch. She saw that the back door was not very closed. The back door was not fully closed, and its key was missing. There were mud marks on the floor. When somebody uses a particular floor for a long time, obviously, beyond that there was the garden, and beyond that there was the empty space. So somebody might have come through that. So when he had come through the garden and the empty space beyond that, mud must have stuck to his shoes. So this area had become muddy, and the mud had dried up. There was mud on the floor where someone had come in more than once. So obviously there would be more footmarks. The burglars must have made frequent use of the house, and they must have come in through the back door. She stood panting in the blackness. Panting is breathing very heavily. When you run over a long distance, you pant. This is breathing heavily, panting. Somewhere outside, frogs croaked, and there was a knock. Suddenly there was a knock. एकरे ताको बहुत डर लगुची, संध्या बेलू डर लगुची. एबे से जानी सरलेनी जे रबर्स माने ता घरे रहउचंती. There is possibility of an attack, and she might be killed even. So एते कथा जानला परे आ किए धैर्य धरिक रहइबो. तेनु से सेते बेलू से देखलानी, she hears a sudden knock on the window. Now then she realizes that it was a flying insect. An insect which was flying outside. It had bumped on the glass of the window. Then the refrigerator switched itself off. It happens at times. A refrigerator works for some time, you can hear the humming sound. Kichi समय refrigerator चलला ପରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ when uh, it attains a particular temperature, it is switched off automatically. It was by chance that it had done so just then, of course, but it was shocking. ହଠାତ୍ ତମେ ଠିଆ ଘର ଭିତରେ ଏକୁଟିଆ ଅଛ, କିଛି କଥା ନାହିଁ, ସେ ଲାଇଟଟା ଲିଭିଯିବ। ଲାଇଟଟା ଫ୍ୟୁଜ୍ ବି ହେଇଯାଇଥାଇପାରେ, କିନ୍ତୁ ଯେତେବେଳେ ତମେ when you are living alone, when you are alone at home and there is nobody in the vicinity, in the surrounding area, ସେତେବେଳେ ବଲ୍ବଟା ଏକ୍ଜାକ୍ଟଲି ଖରାପ ହେଇଯିବା, ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଭାରି ଟେରିଫାଇଂ କୋଇନ୍ସିଡେନ୍ସ ତମେ କହିପାରିବ। ଏମିତି ହୁଏ ଜୀବନରେ ବହୁତ ଜିନିଷ, କିନ୍ତୁ ଠିକ୍ ଏକ୍ଜାକ୍ଟଲି ସେତିକି ବେଳେ ହବାଟା ଇଟ୍ ୱାଜ୍ ଏ ଟେରିଫାଇଂ କୋଇନ୍ସିଡେନ୍ସ। The proper thing, the logical thing was to go to the telephone now. Then she thought, okay, let me go to the telephone. I have already made a discovery that the robbers had used my house as a storehouse. I must inform the police now. That would be the most logical thing. Just as she reached the telephone, there was a faint noise which seemed like the footsteps of a person. She was able to hear the footsteps of a person who was coming through the garden. She waited. She now realized her end had come. Now she was going to die. Nobody would be able to save her. Morli mu ebe ଆଉ ବଞ୍ଚିବାର ଚାନ୍ସ ନାହିଁ। She waited, filled with such fear that her body did not seem to exist and she had no physical sensation at all. So she had completely frozen. She had become frigid, frigid, completely frozen, terrified, in fear. But a part of her brain saw with infinite despair that if the burglars had been near the house at sunset, intending to enter it as soon as darkness fell, they would have seen the taxi deliver her. They would have known that sooner or later she would discover proof of their presence. And what she had just done told them of her discovery. The light in the bedroom where their loot was hidden turned out. Every other light turned out. Now a very, comforting thought, you can say, came to her mind. Se bhabila je jodi suppose the burglar was hiding, the thief was hiding somewhere nearby, just behind a bush or behind some tree, then he must have marked, waiting for an opportunity to get into the house. Se ketebele ghorku asiparibo? After sunset, after it was dark. ତେଣୁ ସେ ଯଦି ସେଇଠି ଅପେକ୍ଷା କରୁଛି behind some tree or behind some bush, then obviously he must have marked her. The car came, taxi driver came, taxi driver left her there. She went inside, switched on the lights one after another. Then she has, okay, from outside they might not have known that she has already made the discovery, but common sense would say that she must have made the discovery. She must have found out the stolen goods. Then she started switching off the lights one after another. So, the robber must have marked this from there, from his hiding place. Right? There was a soft, no, the robber just now came. She could hear his footsteps through the garden. There was a soft sound at the back door. It squeaked. A squeaking noise is made when you open the door. Connie went stiff. She was completely taken over by terror. The sound of the telephone dial would tell everything. She would not possibly be able to summon help. Now she is thinking. Now, one good thing that is happening in case of Connie, she is constantly thinking about different things. She is weighing the pros and cons. ମୁଁ ଏଇଟା କଲେ କ'ଣ ହବ, ମୁଁ ସେଇଟା କଲେ କ'ଣ ହବ. Usually ଆମେ ସବୁ କ'ଣ ହଉ, when we come face to face with danger, we become completely paralyzed. Our thoughts paralyze. We become completely paralyzed with terror. ତମେ ଯଦି ଭାବିବା ବନ୍ଦ କରିଦବ, if you stop thinking, how would you find a solution? But one good thing that is happening in case of Koni, she is constantly thinking different things. She says, okay, if I go to the telephone now and if I try to ring up somebody, telephone somebody, these days you have numbers, but those days there was a big dial, and if you dial 9, it will like krrr, krrr, krrr. So it would produce a sound, and if it produced a sound, she would be easily found out from somebody would find out that she was already there and she was trying to contact somebody. There was the soft whisper of a foot on the kitchen floor. Somebody was walking on the kitchen floor and there was a soft sound. Connie's hands closed. The one thought that came to her now was that she must breathe quietly. She was panting in terror. If you pant like this, another person can hear it. She immediately decided, okay, let me breathe a little bit lightly so that the other person might not hear or would not be able to hear my breathing sound. There was a grey glow. It was a torch light. The figure in the kitchen was throwing a torch beam on the floor, torch light on the floor. It was the robber. Then it halted for some time, stopped for some time, waiting, as if, perhaps the robber found something, guessed something, smelled something, doubted something, that perhaps the owner had returned. He knew that she was hiding somewhere in the house. So the robber had the idea that the owner had come and the owner was hiding somewhere. He went almost soundlessly into the living room. She saw the glow of the light there. Nobody was there in the living room. He came back to the kitchen. Nobody was there in the kitchen. She heard him moving quietly, listening towards the door through which she had come only a few seconds before to use the telephone. So he was standing very close to this room, the room in which the telephone was, and where she had entered a moment ago. He came through that door within 3 feet of her. So close he was to death. Jama. ଯେମିତି ଜମ ପାଖେ ପାଖେ ମାନେ ଯେମିତି ଜମ ତା ପାଖେ ପାଖେ ଦେଇକି ଚାଲିକି ଯାଉଛନ୍ତି. But when he was fully through the doorway, she was behind him. ସେ ଲୋକଟା ଯେତେବେଳେ when he entered inside, କୋନି ତ ସେପଟ କବାଟ ପାଖରେ ଲୁଚିଛି. So naturally, Koni was standing at his back. Again he flashed the light, but he did not think to look behind. If he had looked behind even once, he would have found out Koni. But ବେଳେ ବେଳେ କହନ୍ତି ଅରକ୍ଷିତକୁ ଦୈବ ସାହା. So God helps those who help themselves. Koni was helping herself. She was thinking. She was facing the situation very bravely, boldly. She was trying to be courageous. And the most important thing I told you, she was thinking all the time. Because she was thinking all the time, perhaps God wanted to help her. In the grayish light reflected from the floor, she recognized him. Okay, she was taken for surprise. I know this man. Right? I know this man. Now the robber went to the dining room. He moved very quietly, but he bumped ever so slightly against a chair. The noise made her want to shriek. He was haunting her. He knew that she was in the house and he had to kill her. He knew she was there somewhere in the house, and the only way of escape was to kill her. He knew she knew her. Se mate janiche. If she finds me, she would recognize me. So the only way, if I want to escape from all this, escape with the loot, then I have to kill her. He had to get his loot and get away, run away from there. And she must not be able to tell anything about him. He was back in the kitchen again. He stood there listening. Connie was aware of a new and added emotion which came of her recognition of him. She felt that she would lie down at any moment and scream because she knew him. So at times this thought came to her mind. Right? Should I scream? My God, I know this man. How dare he do it? In my absence, he has used my house. And this is also a part of the crime. My house has become a part of the crime. He has committed crime elsewhere and he has dumped things here. So my house will also be a part of investigation. If police investigates the case, my house will also be used as a spot for investigation. He came towards the door again, but he went up the stairs. They creaked under his weight. He must creak. Creaking is a creaking noise. Creaking is a noise that is produced when you walk on, planks of wood, potta. Potta upare challe gote cut sound habo. So there were stairs गुड़ाक सिना जदि आमर सीमेंटेड स्टेयर हेइथिबो बेसी किछि साउंड हबनी. Only there would be sound of the shoes. जदि पट्टारे तैयारी हेइथिबो तो obviously there would be a noise. He must have reasoned cunningly that she would want to hide, and because he was afraid, so he would go to the bedroom and he must look under the bed. If she had decided to hide, she must be hiding under the bed. Connie slipped her feet out of the slippers. Connie was wearing a pair of slippers. She thought, okay, let me take out, my feet out of these. Because if I walked, if there came an opportunity for me to escape, it would be better if I escape without producing any noise. That would be better. With the slippers on, it would not be possible. So he had not reached the top of the stairs before she stood in the stockinged feet in the blackness below. So the robber tried to find her out on the ground floor. Didn't find her. Now next, he went upstairs. This was an opportunity for her. She crept out of the hiding place. With a passionate care that almost vanished when she was in the blessed night. There were stars. She remembered that. She must not step on the small stones. Two lines I have left. The front door was impossible. She had locked, she knew. She had kept the front door open for quite some time. But then she went and locked it. So now she knows if I go to the front door and try to open it, it would produce a sound. And that sound would attract the attention of the person. And he would run after me to kill me. But he had not closed the back door behind him. This man had come through the back door, but he had not closed it. So since he had not closed it, she would not have to open it. She crept out of it. She went out. She saw stars. Usually you feel comfortable inside your house, inside your bedroom. गोटे अंधार राति रे गोटे एकुटिया जगह रे तमे बाहर को जाई केबे कंफर्टेबल फील करो के. बट कोनी वाज फीलिंग वेरी कंफर्टेबल outside. She was outside her house, not inside her house. She saw the stars. She remembered that she must not step on the small stones on which her feet might make a noise. She was very careful. There were sounds inside the house. He was opening cupboards. deliberately making sounds to fill her with panic. So he knew she was hiding somewhere. So he was searching for her everywhere. Under the bed, inside the cupboard, behind some door. Okay. There were bushes by the garage. So she slowed her flight to avoid them. Slowed her flight means she walked a little bit slower. Otherwise, she was going to bump into them. Bushes were there. And then she came upon the motorcycle. She saw the motorcycle. She smelled it, oil, petrol, and rubber. Motorcycle deru eya to bas gandha bahare na. So in the darkness, she found that a motorcycle had been parked there, and these smells were coming. Smell of oil, petrol, rubber. It was useless to her. How could she use it? Jadi se motorcycle शिखिथांदा, okay, she would have ridden it, but it was useless. She had no idea how to operate it, how it worked. But suddenly, a nice thought came to her mind. The motorcycle was not actually useless. Connie ran her hands over the machine. She turned a little tap, and the smell of petrol grew strong. Petrol came out. She had a matchstick with her, matchbox with her. There was a crash inside the house, but outside, the night was full of stars, and the air was cool and sweet. Except that the smell of petrol was growing stronger and stronger. She had opened that pipe, petrol tank. Now petrol was flowing out. Connie had a box of matches in her pocket. Quickly, she got it out and in one motion struck a match and dropped it, ran away into the darkness. What would have happened? The motorcycle was now on fire, and the fire must be raging, burning very brightly, attracting the attention of people who were living on the other side of the way. तो या घरटा सिना एकुटिया थिला. If there is a fire, it would attract the attention of the people. जे से रास्ता रे जाउथो तार attention draw करिवो. Those who are living on the other side of the way, तांकर भी attention draw होबो, and fire engine would soon arrive. So how clever she was. She kept her cool. That was the most important thing. She became nervous. She was fearful. She dreaded death. There was a possibility of death also, but she kept her cool. टिके धैर्य. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଗୋଟେ difficulty ଆସୁଛି ସେତେବେଳେ ଆମକୁ ଧୈର୍ଯ୍ୟ ରଖିବାକୁ ପଡିବ. We have to wait with patience. ଗୋଟେ opportunity ପାଇଁ, ଗୋଟେ ସୁଯୋଗ ପାଇଁ. ସୁଯୋଗ ପାଇଲେ ଆମେ ଖସିକି ପଳେଇବା. So ଦେଖ, now she is outside. She puts the motorcycle on fire and runs away from there. She hid herself in the shadows and watched. The fire would be seen across the bay. It would plainly be at Connie's house because her house was the only house. So now people would come quickly. A lot of them would come. And fire engines would obviously come. As the flames grew higher, she saw the figure plunge from the house. That person was there inside the house. He was throwing things here and there, causing a lot of noise. He had also become desperate. He knew he was going to be caught. So he had also become frustrated, desperate. He knew he was going to be caught. If he killed her, he was going to survive. But she was nowhere to be found. So say that robber ran out of the house and he started to douse the fire, to extinguish the fire, to put out the fire. But it was impossible. Right? Petrol fire. So how would it extinguish, or how it would be put out easily? He knew it. Even his twisted mind would tell him that nothing would hide his identity now. So that robber knew very well that he was going to be found out from the number plate on the motorcycle. Motorcycle, now police would come, now fire engine would come, now there would be an investigation. From the investigation, they would find out the number of the motorcycle. From the number of the motorcycle, they would find the owner. What the so owner would be taken into investigation, purview of investigation, what he was doing there when the owner of the house was not there, what he was doing there. So police the ଯେତେବେଳେ ତାଙ୍କ ମେଥଡ ଅଫ ଇନଭେଷ୍ଟିଗେସନ ଆପ୍ଲାଏ କରିବେ ସତ ବାହାରି ଯିବ, ଏଥିରେ ଭାବିବାର କିଛି ନାହିଁ। Connie found herself weeping. It was partly relief. One, two feelings were there. One was relief, the second one terror. She was still terrified. But it was also the frightening realization that the fears she had heard about them, the men who prey on others, were not entirely without foundation. So last unit re ame padithile je usually there are people who are afraid of darkness, who check under the bed many times to find out if somebody is hiding there. When they go by a deserted path, a lonely path during the night, they look here and there. So she thought, okay, no, once these are things of the mind. ମାନସିକ ଭାବରେ ଜଣେ ବୋଧେ ଏମିତି ଭାବୁଛି ଏଗୁଡ଼ା ଆକ୍ଚୁଆଲି ଏମିତି କିଛି ହବାର ନାହିଁ, ବଟ୍ ନାଉ ସି ନ୍ୟୁ ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ଦିସ୍ ଥିଙ୍ଗସ୍ ୱେର୍ ରିଅଲ୍ and such things she could have been murdered by that robber. Had she not escaped, she could have been murdered. The lights of cars began to focus towards the house. Obviously, many people saw the fire burning brightly, a large fire. Now they came in their cars. The bells of fire engine came, started ringing, grew louder because they approached the house. And in the leaping flames surrounding the motorcycle, a large, awkward and desperate person he was fighting with the fire. He was trying to douse the fire. This robber, he was trying to douse the fire with handfuls of earth, soil. He was throwing soil onto the fire in an attempt to douse it. Connie was hiding behind some bush, some distance away. The robber could not see Connie, but Connie saw the helpless person, desperate person, trying desperately to douse the fire, to put out the fire. Even so, she was quite safe now, Connie knew. She began to cry in reaction from her terror. How terrified she was throughout the evening, and how she had dealt with this untoward situation, a situation which required a lot of courage, which required a lot of strength of mind. But also she wept as if her heart would break for poor Mrs. Winston. Connie knew she could have been murdered. Her name might have figured in the list of people, list of women who had been murdered by robbers. ଯେତେ ଜଣ ସ୍ତ୍ରୀ ଲୋକ ରବର ମାନଙ୍କ ଦ୍ୱାରା ମର୍ଡର ହେଇଥିଲେ ତାଙ୍କ ନାଁ ସେ ଲିଷ୍ଟରେ ତା ଦେହରେ କୋନିର ନାଁ ବି ଥାନ୍ତା। But Connie was feeling bad for one woman. Who was this woman? Mrs. Winston. The writer doesn't tell you who the robber was, but he leaves a hint here for you. Dear students, it was Mrs. Winston's son, right? So in the first unit, she had talked about him. His name was Charles. Charles was the robber. And Connie was thanking God that she had been able to save herself. Thank you very much. I think you must have understood the whole chapter quite well. I have discussed things in Odia also so that your understanding improves. Thank you very much.